Hello, this morning we're heading to the classroom.
The Prime Minister started the week telling us all to do our homework.
Without a solid foundation in maths, our children risk being left behind, shut out of careers they aspire to and the lives that they want to lead.
But the problems in schools are much more complex than 1, 2, 3. The terrible death of a head teacher whose school was downgraded by inspectors has prompted calls for a rethink.
What I think needs to happen and should have happened already is a pause in inspections.
As teachers get ready to walk out of the classroom, and some kids struggle to catch up after COVID, with some dreadful warnings about the state of classrooms and morale in schools. We have one big question this morning. How best can parents and the public judge what's really going on?
For her first interview since the death of Ruth Perry, the Chief Inspector of Schools, Amanda Spielman, is here to answer our questions. After the Prime Minister's friend and deputy quit after he was found to have bullied staff, the government's new number 2, Oliver Dowden, will join us too. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, is back in the studio, only a couple of weeks until the local elections. Vying for attention with Labour, still well ahead in the polls, their pension spokesman, Jonathan Ashworth, is with us too. And with me at the mega desk, we have a fantastic panel for you this morning. Henry Dimbleby, foodie, author, who until last month was helping the government with their plans. Lorna Hughes, the editor of Scotland's Sunday Mail, that's made the running on a series of important stories about the SNP. And the voice of thousands of teachers and critic of Ofsted, Mary Bousted from the National Education Union. Good morning to our mega desk. Things look a bit different in here this week because this is the huge setup that we're getting ready for the local election programmes and all the politicking around that in a couple of weeks' time. And you're joining us on BBC Two because of all of those impressive souls who are getting pounding on London's pavements on the marathon over on BBC One. But thrilled you're with us here on Two. Let's start with a look at the front pages of the newspapers. There they are. The Observer claims the Tories have a plan to politicise the civil service after the RAB scandal. The Sunday Times has a fascinating story about an MI6 spy. The Sunday Telegraph says the Home Secretary is ready to defy judges on migrants. The tabloids, the Scottish Sunday Mail, the SNP cops hunting for burner phones. We'll talk about that with the editor of that paper who's with us. And the Mirror with some details of Boris Johnson having another lavish £4,000 a night holiday, they claim. But let's start with our conversation about what's going on in our schools. Welcome to all three of you. Thanks for being with us this morning. Mary, firstly to you, is the way that schools are inspected working at the moment?
No, it's not working at all. The problem is the crisis has now come to a fore, but it's been a problem which has been growing over decades. And the problem is that Ofsted doesn't inspect schools fairly, and that Ofsted doesn't know whether it raises qualities in schools at all. And it has no research to back up the claims it makes about, getting schools to be better at teaching and learning. And the problem that teachers and leaders have is that they've got no idea which inspection team will turn up at their school, one which will do a decent inspection or one which will be aggressive and demeaning. So
you think there's variability in the system, but conversation has really come about because of the very sad death of Ruth Perry, a head teacher who took her own life. There's an interesting history to something quite similar that happened in Scotland, Lorna, where schools are run differently, they're inspected differently, but just tell us about what happened.
About 15 years ago, a teacher died in the Borders, and certainly it was decided that there was inquiry, and it was felt that she had taken her own life as a result of an inspection. And there was a cultural shift, and it meant that the traditional inspections didn't actually happen, and it's far more over a course of days. It's over, has a number of factors involved, and certainly I don't think in Scotland we see the same problems that teachers are talking about at all.
So there was a culture change, but some people might say, Henry, that basically everybody blames the ref, right? Teachers, like lots of us, don't necessarily like being judged. As a parent, what do you think of Ofsted? Is it useful?
So I've been a parent. I've also been a governor in a state school in Hackney, my children's state school. Clearly, you need someone. It is useful to have someone holding you to account, and I think that the conversations at the Ofsted inspection that we had as governors were very useful to us to help ask the teachers. What I worry about, however, is when you get your excellent, this huge gap between inspections. So I do think it should be a little bit more supportive, little and often, rather than a kind of a judgment.
Make or break
it's the
inspection.
process enables you to ask the right questions.
OK, well, lots to get into with the Chief Inspector, so we're going to talk a lot about education this morning. Thank you, all three of you, for now. Let's go to the classroom then. In January, the head teacher, Ruth Perry, took her own life while she was waiting for an Ofsted report to be published. She knew it would downgrade the school she loved from outstanding to inadequate, the lowest measure. But her death has supercharged a conversation that was already rumbling about how England schools are inspected and graded, and it's led to many teachers expressing concerns about the pressure. Now, this week, Ofsted said it was going to make some changes in particular elements of their inspections after Ruth's death, but her family has clearly laid the blame for what happened at Ofsted's door, and they're calling for a halt to all inspections.
There is no doubt in my family's mind at all that Ruth killed herself because of that Ofsted inspection. She was fine beforehand. She was not fine during and after it. So it is a potentially dangerous system.
Now, to be clear, no one can know exactly what was going on in Ruth Perry's mind, but you hear how clear her family's conviction were about what was happening. Welcome to you, Amanda Spielman. You're the Chief Inspector for England Schools, and it's the first time that you've spoken since that terrible event. What is your response to the family's very clear view that the downgrade of the school played a part in her death?
Well, first of all, Ruth Perry's death was clearly a tragic event. It's something that I and my colleagues at Ofsted feel very deeply. And of course, we have the most profound sympathy for her family and for all the Caversham school community. Of course, there'll be a coroner's inquest, I hope in the not too distant future, and we will be fully cooperating with that, sharing everything that we have from the inspection.
But do you think that the inspection came to the right conclusion?
I do. I think the findings were secure, and I think the inspection team worked with the professionalism and sensitivity that I would expect from our inspectors.
Have you any concerns at all about what happened during that inspection when her school went from outstanding to inadequate?
From what I've seen, I don't have any reason to doubt the inspection. Inspection is a sensitive process. We are there looking for children, looking for whether education is right for children, looking at whether protecting children's welfare is happening the way it should. Sometimes that can mean we have very difficult, very sensitive conversations in an inspection. Our inspectors are trained, prepared, they've all worked in schools themselves. They really understand what it feels like at the receiving end.
We've taken a look at the report into Caversham, as you would expect, and we can show the summary to our viewers this morning. Now, it was marked good on the quality of education, good on behaviour, good on personal development, inadequate on leadership, good on early years provision. And if you look further into the report, there's some quotes there. Pupils enjoy coming to this welcoming and vibrant school. Relationships between staff are warm and supportive. And when you look at that and you read the report in full and you listen to the outpouring of concern there's been in that community and terrible sadness, can't you help but conclude that to judge a school with one blunt word, inadequate, is too blunt a system?
So first of all, it's really important for people to understand that we do look at safeguarding as well as all the aspects of quality of education. We look at behaviour, we look at personal development, we look at leadership and management. But there are times when failures in safeguarding can be sufficiently serious that alone can bring an overall judgment down. We actually make a number of judgments in an inspection. We make 4 key judgments plus a judgment of the effectiveness of safeguarding. Yes, they are synthesised into an overall judgment. That's partly to help parents. We know that parents like the clarity and simplicity of the model. It's also because the wider system of school accountability that government operates does use those overall judgments. So it's not for us to say we're going to fundamentally change the grading system. That would have to be a bigger government decision.
But there has been a huge conversation in the last couple of weeks about boiling all the complexities, all of the knowledge in a school, all of the environment and the atmosphere down to a school, down just to a one-word label. And you say there that parents want it, but we have been inundated with emails from our viewers about this subject. Suzanne, who's a parent, says, I'd like to know why Ofsted are continuing with this scoring system. Labelling a school good or bad doesn't give me a choice. The submitted report is clear and fair. Now, are you telling parents watching this morning that you don't trust them to read 4 pages of a report that they can only deal with one word?
Of course we trust them, and of course we test our reports. We've done a lot of work with parents, and we survey to find out whether they're finding our reports useful. That's a core part of our work. It's one of the audiences that inspection serves. It's the prime audience, actually. Parents want the assurance that comes from the inspection process and the knowledge that schools are going through the inspection process, as well as the reports themselves.
But when it comes to the impact that single word can have, it clearly is causing huge concern. We had another email from a teacher who said, I've taught in a secondary school for 43 years. To label a school with a single word based on 2 days is far too simplistic. And this teacher asks, I would like to know how many years teaching experience you have that gives you confidence to say this is the best way of doing things.
Every inspector has many years of experience. Every inspector has been a school leader. Every inspector understands what it's like at the receiving end. So it is really important to understand that. This is not a group of people from a completely different context coming in and having these conversations and making these judgments. It is people who are themselves deeply steeped in the world of schools. Many of them are current serving heads or deputy heads. Our inspection model draws on the sector. So it's really important for people to understand inspectors aren't beings from another planet. They are absolutely human beings understanding those sensitivities and difficult issues.
But do you think then that nothing's going wrong?
I think inspection has a tough job to do. There are many people who are sort of profoundly opposed to the wider system of accountability, who would like something very different. It's essentially a political debate about the right way to run the school system overall.
You must have a view as the Chief Inspector of Schools, and on that particular issue of the one word, you said there it was Minister's decision as to whether or not they would stick with that system. But with your experience of running the organisation, and I know you're standing down towards the end of this year, so with your experience, actually, would it be better to say, let's just get rid of that label, give parents the 4-page report, do the job essentially in exactly the same way, but just get rid of that one word which can cause such distress and upset? And you know what happens when a school's rated inadequate. Sometimes people lose their jobs. Sometimes teachers leave.
There are two different questions actually rolled up in that. One is about the judgments themselves, and one is about the wording. My own view is this: that if we changed simply the wording of the judgments and that the same judgments were there but with a different label on them, in 3 or 6 or 9 months' time, people would be saying it's not about the precise wording, it's about what they signify. So I think it is really important to concentrate on what they signify. But every judgment in the system has a use at the moment. They are used for, not just for parents but also for government, both in allocating support and in deciding where interventions are necessary. So it would have to be a bigger, wider reform of the education system to do that. We have designed the inspection model and the set of judgments to fit the education system as it's currently conceived. It would be possible to run the whole school system differently, and you might design inspection differently for that. But for the system as it stands today, we've designed a solid model.
Do you think it is an effective model, though? I mean, academics have looked at 10 years of Ofsted inspections, and once they'd taken into account children's backgrounds, they basically found no detectable difference. That was the academics' phrase: no detectable difference between good, requires improvement, and inadequate. So what evidence do you have that it's actually working?
We've got 30 years of Ofsted in action. We've been doing our job thoroughly and carefully, and that it may be contributing to there being relatively little between school variation in this country compared to some others. We recently restarted inspecting the schools that had been judged outstanding many years ago, and an exemption was put in place for schools with an outstanding judgment back in 2010. So some of those schools went 10, 15, almost 15 years without inspection.
And was that a mistake?
I do believe it was a mistake, and the profile of judgments we're seeing coming out of those re-inspections shows that many of those schools are no longer coming out as outstanding.
That indeed is what we believe happened at Caversham Primary, Ruth Perry's school. But just before we move on to some wider issues, her family say that you haven't been in contact with them, and they've found that difficult. Are you going to speak to Ruth Perry's family?
Of course, we'd be more than happy to speak to them if they would like to. We haven't wanted to intrude on their grief. We haven't had any approach, but we haven't ignored anything, and would happily speak to them.
And will you then? I mean, why haven't you reached out so far?
Well, it's a delicate balance when you have a grieving family, whether to intrude on that or not. But as I say, we're absolutely open to doing that.
Okay, because they've said publicly they haven't heard from you, and actually we've also spoken to her sister here at the BBC, and she's expressed a desire to have contact from you. Why do you think, though, more broadly, there is a culture of fear around Ofsted? I mean, maybe there are myths, maybe it's not justified, but do you acknowledge that that culture does exist?
I certainly acknowledge that it exists. I think it comes from a couple of things, perhaps. One is the consequences that people think about in the context of inspection, especially for inadequate judgments, which I should say are a tiny proportion. Nearly 9 out of 10 schools going through inspection, the judgment is good or outstanding. For the vast majority of schools, I know that it's a positive and affirming experience.
Really?
So absolutely, we get plenty of feedback to say that inspection is a constructive professional dialogue. That's how it is designed to be, a constructive professional dialogue that really helps people think about what they're doing, really helps them take things forward. That's the essence of how we design it.
Okay.
And how we train people.
Okay, well, I want to talk about some wider issues, because Ofsted, of course, is a big survey of what's going on in our schools all over the place. Is it harder, do you think, to be a pupil in this country since the pandemic?
I think it's a really tough time for schools at the moment, for teachers, heads and pupils. The post-COVID hangover, if I can put it like that, is quite acute. We've got all the different post-COVID problems. During COVID, schools did do a fantastic job. Coming back, they've got pupils not just with sort of academic catch-up needs, but also with greater mental health difficulties, with more special educational needs. Behaviour is challenging, socialisation's delayed. So it's a really hard time to manage a school, especially when the external services that you need more of sometimes aren't even fully back on stream. So it's a tough time out there.
It's been very, very striking, in fact, in the last couple of days. We've heard from lots of teachers, we've heard from lots of parents. Do you think that this is a sector that is in a bad shape? I mean, do you worry about what's going on? Have you seen it like this before?
I think there's a lot of unhappiness. Obviously, there are disputes with government about pay and funding. There's clearly a lot of bad feeling around. And when there is bad feeling around, Ofsted often becomes a sort of lightning rod through which the tensions and frustrations can be discharged.
Do you think you're being unfairly blamed?
I think it's really important to understand that there's a wider disagreement here between different factions about how schools should be run, how school accountability should work more broadly. We're just one part of that system. We're not the regulator. We don't make decisions about what happens to school. We are just the inspectorate going to look and see whether children are getting the experience they should in schools.
But it's interesting because we've heard and read a lot of anxiety and also a lot of anger towards how Ofsted inspectors sometimes behave, a lot of anger with how the organisation operates. And I don't think anybody would doubt your good intentions, but listening to you this morning, I think some of our viewers watching might wonder if you really understand the depth of feeling if you really get the strength of feeling towards Ofsted?
I absolutely do, but I also look very hard at what we actually hear back from inspections on the ground. So I think it's really difficult when you've got both the reality on the ground and also perceptions that can sometimes get exacerbated by external narratives.
What do you mean by that?
If people hear about inspection but haven't actually experienced it, especially not experienced it in recent years, they may come to believe things that aren't actually true. So firstly, we had a big COVID suspension, so only there's quite a small proportion of schools that have been inspected since the pandemic began. That's quite a long while in many people's working lives. And also inspection only touches a small proportion of the people in the school, typically the most senior people. So you may make something that's a really constructive conversation, but there simply isn't the capacity in the system to go out and talk to meet every teacher, talk to every teacher. I wish there were, but we have to work within the constraints that are set.
One of the things that many people are concerned about that's happened also since the pandemic is the rate of absences.
Yes.
Now, we know there's a significant increase. Some latest figures suggest there are 140,000 children, I believe in England alone, who were regularly, severely absent. Where are all these kids who are missing so much school?
Well, firstly, it's clear that some children have fallen out of the system entirely, and it's really hard to know what's going on. Our responsibilities are to inspect schools and colleges and apprenticeships, so it's hard for us to know where they are, but we have expressed significant concern. But there's also, within that, far more children who are attending some but not enough school. The children who 3 years ago were there sort of 9 days out of 10, and now they're 8 days out of 10.
This is a really significant problem.
It is significant, which is why we've
lost children. They've slipped through the net.
Well, some of them are lost. More of them. There's a really big group of children who are not attending school enough to really get the most out of it, to get the benefit of education. You do need to be there day after day, week after week, month after month. It's a long-term business education. So doing everything that we can to make sure that children are in school regularly, to help schools maintain those relationships with families that help to get children there. We published a report last year summarising all the things that we can see are helpful, but we know that this is a big sector challenge.
Just finally and briefly, if you can, there have been already some teaching strikes. There are going to be more. We'll talk about it a bit later this morning. But are you concerned about the damage that could do to children?
Well, of course. Children have missed a great deal over the last few years. It is so important that their education continues and is interrupted as little as it can possibly be.
So would you urge the unions not to walk out, or the governments to pay the teachers more?
I hope that disputes can be resolved rapidly and constructively, because we know that children need to be at school.
OK, Amanda Spielman, thank you so much for giving us your time this morning, Chief Inspector of Schools in England. Thank you very much indeed for taking all of our questions. Now, please let us know what you thought of what Amanda had to say. You've sent us so many emails in the last couple of days, more than on any other subject we've covered on the programme, in fact. And we'll check in shortly with the leader of one of the big teaching unions, Mary Bowstead. But contending with schools is just one of the things on the Prime Minister's list. 48 hours ago, he lost one of his biggest allies. Dominic Raab quit after an independent report said he had bullied staff, although he certainly didn't agree.
Look, if someone had hurt feelings because of something I did, of course, I want an empowered team. The vast majority of the civil servants who worked for me were brilliant, fantastic, and actually relished the energy, the challenge, the drive that I believe I brought. But of course, I don't want to upset anyone, and I made clear that I'm sorry for that. But that's not bullying, and we can't deliver for the British people if the bar is that low.
Well, the newly minted Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, joins us this morning. It's you in that number 2 spot now. Thank you for coming in. The departure of your former colleague, Dominic Raab, has prompted a bit of a conversation about bullying at work, what is bullying and what is not. Are you confident that you have never bullied anyone?
Well, I think people that have worked with me and know me well would never accept that characterisation of me. Of course, we all have our frustrations. We're all working hard to serve the British people. It's
interesting, though, isn't it? Because Dominic Raab, I think, has got some people thinking about what bullying is at work, and it may not be in 2023 what people had traditionally thought. So are there any moments that you can think of when maybe you wish now, or you wonder if your behaviour might have been perceived like that by a member of your staff?
Well, of course, we all work hard to be as professional as we possibly can. But at the heart of it, and I think anyone who has worked at the top level of government, and I've been fortunate enough to serve as a cabinet minister, knows that we're in highly pressured situations. And I certainly don't want the outcome of this to be, and it certainly won't be the case for me, that there will be any letting up in the high standards I expect of civil servants. But I think, Laura, you're right to say times have changed. And indeed, if you look back to what happened, it was no great secret what happened with Gordon Brown when he was Prime Minister. I don't think that kind of conduct from him would be acceptable in today's climate.
I had a funny feeling that you might mention the legends about Gordon Brown's behaviour in office. I thought that might come up. But the question here is also being raised by Dominic Raab is about the civil service. Now, he's essentially accused people of trying to block him and somehow some kind of conspiracy of people who are out to get him. Isn't actually the truth, which is what an independent senior lawyer found, that he behaved badly sometimes, he was warned about his behaviour sometimes, and then he got found out and he lost his job. I mean, is it seemly for him to be trying to blame other people for his mistakes?
Well, I worked with Dom Raab a lot, and I think particularly of the time when he stood in for Boris Johnson at the height of the COVID pandemic. I have great respect for him as a public servant, but Dom was very clear that if there was an adverse finding against him in this report, he would resign. Dom is a man of his word, and he
civil
stuck by
servants
that.
were actively trying to block him. I mean, that's what he's done. He was accused of something, he was found to have gone wrong, and he said, aha, yes, but those people, they were trying to stop me doing what I was doing. Well, have you seen civil servants trying to block government?
Well, in my experience, and we all have different working styles, I think of things that I've been able to achieve together with civil servants. So I think of the height of the COVID pandemic, when we had all of the theatres and everything else shutting down. We worked together closely as a team with the Treasury, with Number 10, to negotiate that £2 billion culture recovery fund that saved arts and culture in this country. So I think we can work constructively together. What I would not want to be the outcome of this is that there is some kind of diminution in the ability of ministers to expect the highest standards, because in the end, senior civil servants and senior ministers are united in their goal of serving the British people. I do think that out of the report, there is a need to look at our processes around that, and that's why we will be looking at it to see whether we can make it simpler, fairer and less complex.
But do you believe Dominic Raab when he says that is what has happened? Or do you believe the people who expressed their concerns to this independent lawyer who found that in 2 cases he had behaved as a bully?
Well, the Prime Minister set up the Tolley report, and Tolley produced a very extensive report, and there really isn't much further I can add to that. I thought it was very comprehensive in terms of
the report. I'm asking you who you
Laura,
believe,
but you raised first of all, Laura, the allegations. There really isn't anything further I can add in respect of that. As I said to you, it has not been my experience working with civil servants that we can't work together in a constructive way. I haven't experienced that. However, I, of course, have experienced frustrations. We all have experienced frustrations, because in the end, we are passionate about delivering for the British people. And by the way, that's not just ministers of this political colour. Top ministers across the years work very hard to try and serve the British people in the best way that they think possible. And in my experience, most civil servants are committed to doing that. It is really important, though, that we continue to be able to expect the very highest standards. And I know the Prime Minister is committed to that, as am I.
I want to ask you to respond to what Amanda Spielman said. Now, everybody knows about the tragic case of Ruth Perry, the head teacher who took her life after her school was to be downgraded from outstanding to inadequate. As now the second most senior politician in the country, are you satisfied with how Ofsted is run more broadly?
Well, I have, of course, overall confidence in how Ofsted is run. If you forgive me, I wasn't able to hear fully the interview that just took place. I think it is the case that if you look at this tragic case of the head teacher that took their own life, the way in which safeguarding issues are treated, and it's very important, of course, we uphold the highest standards of safeguarding, the proportionality of that in terms of the overall rating of the school does need to be looked at. And I believe that Ofsted are committed to doing that.
Sometimes that is then over the top, do you think, in the way it can switch the whole judgment of a school?
Well, I think it's important that a proportionate approach is taken. And my experience of working with teachers is they are passionately committed to supporting the children in their schools. But it is also right that we do expect high standards, and Ofsted has been a pivotal part in delivering that. And if you look at what's happened under this government, for example, 88% of schools are now good and outstanding. We have to be able to hold teachers and head teachers to account to make sure they're delivering for the pupils and the parents that they serve. But we don't want to do so in a way that excessively puts focus on one issue over another.
Now, I'd like to ask you about something else, an unfolding, very dangerous situation, it seems, in the African country of Sudan. Now, the United States is evacuating their diplomats. France is going to start trying to bring some of its nationals home, as we understand it. Why is the UK just telling people to stay inside?
Well, our first priority is, of course, to protect British
why not help
nationals.
people leave then?
Laura, if you'll let me explain where we are with this situation right now. Clearly, it is a complex and fluid situation. It is the case that the Ministry of Defence is acting in support of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Now, you would not expect me right now, for security reasons, to comment on movements on the ground. But that is the current situation. What I would say to British nationals who are in that country, they should follow the advice, which is to stay indoors, to make the Foreign Office aware through their website of their location.
It sounds like you might therefore be preparing to help people get out. And other countries are talking about this. Now, nobody watching would want you to give specific security details, but other countries are doing different things. It sounds like you might be preparing to help British nationals get out. Is that true?
Well, you reference what's happened in other countries. What I would say is the situation in Sudan is very different, for example, to what you saw in Afghanistan with op pitting. Clearly, we don't kind of have the level of personnel and so on there that we had in that situation. So the current advice for British nationals is to stay at home, to make the Foreign Office aware of their situation. As I say, the Foreign Office are being operationally supported by the Ministry of Defence actively, but I can't give you any further comment.
Okay, now I know today, finally, you want to remind everybody about the loud noise that's going to go off on every single mobile phone in the country this afternoon, this test of the emergency alert. Some of the papers have said this is a sort of new level of nanny statism. Why are you doing this?
Well, I wouldn't accept that characterisation. If you look at countries around the world, whether it's the United States, Canada, Japan and elsewhere, they have emergency alerts on phones as another tool in the toolkit of keeping people alerted during an emergency. What we're going to do this afternoon at 3 p.m. is test the system. Now, it's a bit like when the fire alarm goes off at work. It can be a bit inconvenient and annoying, but I think in future people will be grateful that we tested the system. And what I would say to your viewers is at 3 o'clock, when this siren, which I should say is about the volume of a phone call goes off, you don't need to do anything. It's just a test. OK, well, people will be noting that down, I'm sure, and just thinking, we've never had a fire alarm go off in this studio, so I hope that never happens. I don't want to tempt fate. Oliver Dowden, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Just, I think, 2 days into your new job as Deputy Prime Minister. Great to have you here as ever. Thank you for your time. Well, we've heard just there from the government this morning, but of course, too, at length from the boss of Ofsted, Amanda Spielman. Now, she told us she has no reason to doubt what happened with the inspection of Caversham Primary, the school of Ruth Perry, the head teacher who sadly took her own life. Mary Bousted, you speak for thousands of teachers. Now, you are a critic of Ofsted, but I'm fascinated to know, what did you make of what Amanda Spielman had to say?
Well, I thought it was very notable that Amanda Spielman accepted that Ofsted created a culture of fear in schools. I thought that was the first time that has been accepted. How that then squares with her judgment that it's a positive and affirming experience, I'm very puzzled about that. It's clear to me that the reason why there's a culture of fear is because Ofsted is not a functional inspection agency. Nobody is arguing that schools should not be accountable. I am not arguing that there should not be a system of inspection in schools, just not this one.
Although she didn't say Ofsted has created the culture of fear, she did accept there was a culture of fear around inspection, but she didn't say that is on Ofsted. She said named some other factors.
Well, what she's saying is that teachers and leaders have to deny the evidence of their own senses. Now, she did say that, you know, Ofsted's own feedback showed that leaders found it a positive and affirming experience. That is just not something that my members tell me. And indeed, when that claim was tried to be verified by a journalist, he went to the Ofsted helped him to go on the website. The questions, the survey by which they make that claim is completely inadequate. It asks leading questions.
But in fact, during that, you know, there are different views on this. And in fact, during our interview, we had an email in from one parent who said, "Thank God for Ofsted." And we've had another email from a viewer called Elaine saying, "We'd all love not to be measured in the workplace, but it's not realistic. In private industry, we're measured every day and every month. Schools can't duck the importance of this."
Nobody wants to duck the importance of being measured, or, well, being measured, but we have to be you've got to be measured by a system and by people who know what they're doing. Ofsted have changed their inspection framework 5 times in the last 9 years. So you've got schools constantly running after a new inspection framework. The latest inspection framework, where you've got non-specialist inspectors inspecting subjects they've never taught, phases of education that they've never taught, which they have no degree knowledge in. They're using crib sheets to go round, asking early years children where their writing is. This is an inspectorate which has lost its legitimacy.
Well, it's interesting, Lorna, before our interview, you were telling us what happened in Scotland, where there was a real culture change in how inspections were carried out. As with ever, when these things become a big political and fraught debate, there is a risk, isn't there, for organisations that they end up being tin-eared to concerns. I mean, do you think there's a risk for Ofsted of that here?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. I think that it's very obvious that things could be done differently. As you say, there needs to be checks, there needs to be balances, there needs to be inspections. But I do feel that perhaps putting schools under 2 days or a day and having to get ready for these inspectors coming in, being inspected by people who clearly don't have the qualifications in the actual departments and disciplines as well, I think that's concerning. You know, I would say that the model that exists in Scotland, it sounds to me an awful lot better as a parent and as a teacher.
But as parents, and you were a governor and a parent as well, Henry, I mean, when you listen to Amanda Spielman, you know, her defence is very staunch. We look at the evidence, we think we're doing the right thing, and of course, sometimes people don't like what the judgments are of them. But where do you think the balance should be struck?
You know, what was striking about it, in complex systems, all these complex systems, they're very difficult to intervene on. You try something, it doesn't work.
Yeah, whack-a-mole sometimes.
You have to be prepared to evolve and change all the time, accept former kind of mistakes and move forward. It felt, and I understand also that she has to defend her staff, because, you know, we've seen that in other situations as well, but it felt a little bit defensive. I'm sure there must be things all the time that we can learn from how inspections go.
Now, one thing she also said was that the upcoming teaching strikes would be damaging for children, and she urged unions and government basically to sort it out. Now, in Scotland, there was a resolution after a lot of disruption, rolling strikes. Do you think in the end the politics mean that the UK government will have to budge as well, because parents can't deal with their kids being off all the time from strikes?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it would be madness not to. I think teachers should be rewarded for the job that they're doing anyway, and we were lucky in Scotland that we were able to resolve it after a lot of toing and froing. But yeah, I don't think any parent in the country could probably cope with that again.
Well, Mary, can you answer that then? I mean, the inspector of schools said very clearly, if you go on strike and continue to do so, because there have already been some strikes, I think we can remind people some pictures of them. You're going to damage children's prospects. What do you say to parents who feel that this morning? Just sort it out, get on with it.
Well, we would love to sort it out, and we don't want to damage children's prospects, but it's the government which is refusing to negotiate. They just, you know, since the last offer that the government made was rejected by 98% of National Education Union members in 6 days on a 2/3 turnout. That is an astounding rejection of the offer. Now, what the government should have done was say, right, well, clearly that wasn't good enough. Let's get back into negotiation and let's try and resolve this. That's what we have been constantly asking for, because my members do not want to be out on strike, but they feel there is no alternative.
But what is more important to your members, though, the education of children after a period of real disruption? We've heard at length from Amanda Spielman just how difficult it is for kids right now. And some parents, I think, are going to be screaming at the telly this morning, thinking, well, we're sorry, everybody would like a pay rise, but please don't do this to our children.
Laura, the problem we've got now is that our schools are running on crisis mode every day, and parents watching this will know that their children are routinely being taught by teachers who are not qualified in the subjects they're teaching. Just this morning, I read an article about 2 schools which are now moving to a 4-day week because they can't recruit teachers.
But taking strike action has such an impact on families. I mean, why are you choosing to strike the day after a bank holiday?
Well, because we've got 6 months where we can have a strike action, and it's very difficult to take strike days that we can make work. The legislation around strike action is very, very intense. But we don't want to do this. I say now directly to the government, we'll go in tomorrow. Let's negotiate so we don't have to take strike action on Thursday. None of my members want to disrupt education and lose more pay when they are so inadequately paid already.
OK, well, we'll see if by the end of the programme maybe we can get a response from the Department of Education, and maybe you'll have a meeting in the diary tomorrow. Henry, now you were until recently advising the government on its food strategy. I know you cared passionately about school meals, but some of the warnings that you've been making recently about where we're heading, maybe with too many giant burgers, are quite alarming. Why are you so worried?
Well, we have a food system at the moment that is the biggest cause of non-communicable disease. By 2035, type 2 diabetes is going to cost the NHS more than treating all cancers does today. And what's going to happen? Also, Andy Haldane, the former governor, former chief economist at the Bank of England, says ill health is the thing that's slowing down the economy.
Said that in that seat, actually.
Yeah. So what's going to happen is the NHS is going to suck in money from the rest of all the other government departments, and tax receipts are going to go down, and we're going to end up both sick and impoverished. And why I'm frustrated about it is because while the government is doing actually quite progressive stuff on the environment, they're feeling their way towards that, on health, they're going backwards. So, you know, Boris Johnson came out of having almost died from COVID. He said, we're going to restrict advertising, we're going to grip this. They've now kicked that all down the road to 2025.
Well, in a sec, we'll ask the Labour Party actually what they might do about some of those things if they win the next election. Lorna, just finally to you. Now, your paper, the Sunday Mail, not the same as the Mail on Sunday. It's one of the Scottish Sunday weekend tabloids, has made a lot of the running on the extraordinary saga that's going on in the SNP. Your front page again today has another development. Just tell us about that. And I'm interested too what you just make of what seems to be an extraordinary sort of implosion in a party that was so almighty.
Yes, it feels like a hand grenade's been thrown into Holyrood, really. Our front page today is the latest in a long line of stories that we have been running. It is about a list of things that the police are interested in looking at, and obviously some of those objects are rather mundane and a bit interesting, but it's an ongoing police inquiry. We have Peter Morell, who was the former chief executive of the SNP, arrested. Nicola Sturgeon's husband, arrested, and we have had Colin Beattie, who of course is a treasurer, now no longer treasurer, arrested, and both released pending without. And
neither of them have been charged, and we have to be careful because there is this live investigation. But just lastly on this, if you can, what do you think it really means for politics in Scotland? And that has such a big impact on everything because the SNP sends so many MPs. It makes it very hard for Labour to win a majority.
Yeah, I think Labour will be able to make inroads, but they will have to work hard to do so. If you're asking me, do I think this is the end of the SNP? No, it's certainly not the end for independence. We still have half and half in that, but it is an opportunity to certainly for Labour to make gains.
OK, Lorna, Henry and Mary, thank you very much for your insights for now. We'll get back to you at the end of the programme. So, as hopefully you know by now, you've heard some of your emails through the course of the programme. Do keep them coming. We love to have you as part of our conversations. And I do have to remind us that talking about education, and Ofsted has elicited more emails than we've ever had on any other subject. So do keep them flowing in, and we use your experiences to help us decide what questions to ask our guests from your real world experiences. So you can email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or if you're social media inclined, you can use BBC Laura K as the hashtag. So much going on at the moment, not least Sir Edward Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, arriving in the studio. A couple of weeks to go till the local elections. Welcome to you again. We were just talking there with Mary Bowsett about pay and teachers' strikes. Now, the teachers want above inflation pay increases. Do you think they should get that?
Well, what they want above all is to get around the negotiating table with the government, and I think Mary is completely right on that. I've been quite alarmed by the government's unwillingness to engage in negotiations.
But they haven't made them an offer, and what the teachers want is an above inflation pay rise. They say the offer's not enough.
Well, get round the table. I mean, personally, I think they need a fair deal. There's a shortage of teachers, particularly in specialist subjects. And when I talk to head teachers in my constituency, they're really worried about making sure they can recruit the best people to teach our children.
But should they get above inflation pay rises? I mean, you've said specifically as one of your promises is that pay rises for carers, they should get £2 an hour more than the minimum wage. That is way above inflation. So should teachers get way above inflation too?
Well, I think they should get very near to inflation, but the key thing is...
Near to inflation?
Well, I think people need a fair deal. And if you look at the shortage of teachers, which I've got to come back to, because that's the picture, and whether it's in the education or in the health service or in care, you're seeing huge shortages. And when you have shortages, you do need to give people a fair deal, or you're not going to recruit the people that patients need, that parents want to see. And
people will want to know what you mean by a fair deal and near inflation. So in Scotland, teachers were given 8%. Would 8% be the right kind of amount for teachers in England?
Well, the reason why I keep going back to the negotiation is you need to make sure you're getting a good deal both for the taxpayer and for our schools and our children. And you can only do that if you get round the table. Let me give you an example.
But you can only do that if you offer something and avoid strikes, if you actually give a kind of offer that teachers might accept. Yeah. So I'll ask you again, you said near inflation. Would 8%, which is what teachers got in Scotland, be the kind of figure that you would think would be a good idea?
If that's the sort of thing that could be negotiated and get people back to school and make sure we can deal with the shortages in teachers, that sounds to me in the right sort of ballpark, but it has to come from negotiations. And the fact that the government wouldn't even get around the table, I think, is the scandal. And I think if you're a parent worried about these strikes, if you're a head teacher trying to get staff recruited, you'll be really disappointed. And I think it's partly the chaos in this government. Not only have they had 3 prime ministers and 4 health secretaries and 5 chancellors, they've had 6 education secretaries since the last general election. And that chaos and incompetence at the top is, I think, largely to blame for many of the problems we're seeing, whether it's in our education services or in our health services, where I think we've got a huge crisis.
OK, well, government would, of course, dispute that, and Oliver Dowden was happy to boast about how good some schools are in the country. But I want to turn to the upcoming local elections on May the 4th. Now, one of the big things that councils have power over is housing and planning to an extent. Now, repeatedly, time after time, the Liberal Democrats say nationally we need lots and lots and lots more houses to be built. But then locally, again, time after time after time, Lib Dems campaign very hard against houses being built in their backyards. Now, isn't that double standard part of the reason why we have, according to most people, a very significant housing shortage in this country?
Well, first of all, I don't accept your premise. If you go to my constituency, and I have to declare an interest, my wife is the housing portfolio holder on Kingston Council.
You argue about it over the breakfast table?
No, we agree. And she's building more council houses, council homes for people, affordable homes, than we've seen for over 40 years in my borough.
Well, hang on a minute. You said a development plan near your constituency that was going to build 400 homes was eye-watering, and that was going to be 400 compared to a national shortage that the Housing Federation assesses is more than 300,000.
But you have to look at each plan by each plan, don't you? So we've got a building in my constituency where there's going to be 905 homes, and they're going up now. So I can take you to places both in my constituency and other areas controlled by the Liberal Democrats where we're building lots of houses. But here's the key question. Here's the key question. The problem I have with the government's approach is they have a developer-led approach to housing, and that has resulted in the wrong types of homes being in the wrong places. Don't believe me, that's what Theresa May has said. What Liberal Democrats want is a community-led approach to housing, and all the evidence shows that results in more houses being built that more meet the needs of the local people. They're in the right place. They have the social infrastructure that's needed when you build more houses. And I'm really proud that that's the Liberal Democrat policy, and that's the approach we adopt where we're in power. So I'd say at the next election, if you want the right sorts of homes built in your community, vote Liberal Democrat, because they're going to listen to the community and they're going to make sure the local plan, with all the controls that central government put on it, and they put loads of controls that are really unfair, actually, undemocratic, but with all those controls, Liberal Democrat councillors will listen to the local people.
OK, well, we will see what happens in those upcoming elections. Ed Davey, thanks for coming in. It's always great to have you with us here in the studio. Thank you. Now, we've just been talking a few minutes ago to Henry about the food we eat, and you probably saw that inflation this week slowed a little bit, but food prices kept going up and up and up and up. So what we need to stick in the fridge is still getting more and more and more expensive. The Labour Party today is saying that more should be done to stop food prices going through the roof. Let's talk to Jonathan Ashworth, who is the party's pensions spokesperson, who's with us. Hello again. Good to have you back in the programme. Now, you say that food prices must be brought down. And it's interesting, in this studio in the last few months, we've had the boss of Unite Union and the boss of one of our biggest supermarkets, both saying some companies are profiteering when it comes to food pricing. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, I think what's happening at the moment is that the government are asking the British people, or demanding the British people, pay the price for 13 years of economic failure. We've got families paying more in tax. We've got families paying more for their energy bills.
And I'm here asking you a straightforward question about whether food companies are profiteering and making things harder for people.
Let me finish this point. They're paying more on their energy bills because of a failure to invest in our energy infrastructure. And we're also paying more for food. The weekly shop is costing the average family around £700 extra a year now. And why is our food price increase the highest in the G7, higher than other countries? Well, it's because of the failure to invest in our energy infrastructure. Because
the
food
boss
processing.
Of one of our biggest supermarkets and the boss of one of the biggest unions in the country have both said it is also because some companies are profiteering. Do you agree with that?
There's a number of factors, but the ones which are in the government's control is, let's deal with energy bills for those high energy intensive companies in food manufacturing and processing.
For your view, that we've explained to our viewers that they've said before that part of the problem here, and you're right to outline other factors, but part of the problem here is that companies have been profiteering.
Where there is excess profiteering, where there is excess profiteering, obviously the regulatory bodies should look at that. But there are.
Do you think there is?
But there are. Well, we've not had an analysis from regulatory bodies to tell us what's happening in the market. But what we do know is that food manufacturing companies are facing higher energy bills, and the government could extend the windfall tax to support those food manufacturing companies and bring down their energy costs, which will bring down food prices. You could also deal with the labour market shortages in the food manufacturing sector, which is why I proposed significant welfare reforms to get people back to work, to deal with the traps in the benefit system by offering people an in-work guarantee, by reforming things like the work capability assessment. The government are refusing to do that. So there are policies you can pursue to bring down the costs on British families at the moment, but the government are not doing that.
But you say also that Labour would cut red tape to improve food supplies in the country.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? How would that happen?
Well, you've got to look at you've got to negotiate a veterinary agreement so that you can improve
with the European Union.
So you can improve.
So that's what you mean by that.
You can improve your Brexit arrangements on when it comes to agri products. That would actually cut red tape. It would bring down costs. A lot of the food associations have called for that.
Except if it's to do with the EU, food inflation is actually also a massive problem in European countries. So the food inflation rate for the EU as a whole was identical to that of the UK in March. So it's not really about us not being in the EU.
But we've got the worst inflation rates in the G7, yeah? And that is because of our failure to invest in energy infrastructure, our failure to invest in renewables, in gas storage, in cladding insulating our buildings. If we took those measures, we would bring inflation down overall in the United Kingdom, and that would bring food inflation down as well. And of course, if you deal with labour market shortages in the food industry, which is what my reforms would help with, would also bring down costs.
Let's talk about a different aspect of this. So we've been talking to Henry Dimbleby about food advertising. Now, the government did have big plans to do things like ban, I was going to say bog off, buy one, it felt rather rude, buy one, get one free offers in supermarkets. Now, would Labour ban buy one, get one free deals for junk food?
That's not what we're proposing at the moment, but we do know that we need to have an obesity strategy because, and I know this from the days when I led for the Labour Party on health matters, we have an obesity crisis in this country. Many of our children are leaving school, particularly poorer children are leaving school obese. We can see the huge pressures that is putting on the National Health Service in terms of diabetes.
So why not do something ban those offers?
Because look, families are struggling at the moment. I mean, they're paying more in tax.
Might do it in future
they're paying more in tax than the Conservatives. They're paying more for their energy bills. They're paying more for their mortgages and rent because the Conservatives crashed the economy last autumn. So this isn't the time to impose more costs on families.
But are you saying, therefore, that you might consider doing that in future when people aren't so hard up?
Look, we've got to take measures to deal with obesity. One of the other issues is that, look, we've cut, or the Conservatives have cut, public health budgets. So a lot of obesity services have been scaled way back under the Conservatives.
But I'm asking you what you would do about it if
well,
you win the election. So you're not proposing that at the moment?
We're not proposing that. We've not got a plan for that.
What about a ban on junk food advertising?
Well, that is something that we've looked at in the past, and it's something which we have called for in the past. I mean, the government have actually legislated for it. I mean, the government are supposed to be doing that anyway. So we'll wait and see as the government actually implement their own legislation. I think they legislated for it in 2021, from memory.
And it hasn't yet been fully implemented.
No, but Matt Hancock introduced it, so it'll be interesting to see whether the government actually come back to it.
Just lastly, on something else that's happening in the business world at the moment, is it all over for the CBI, do you think? Will Labour cut its links with the CBI?
Well, we have done.
You have done?
Yeah, we have.
Formally?
We have done. I mean, look, we've got to see whether the CBI can...
What do you mean by that? Have you ceased all contact with him? Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the government have as well, as I understand it. And I think, I mean, the revelations, the stories have just been absolutely shocking, haven't they? I mean, unbelievable that... And I just sort of feel for the people who have been victims, and look, the CBI have really got to get their house in order.
And do you think it should be wound down and replaced by a new organisation?
I mean, this is up for the CBI. I mean, to decide how they're going to reform themselves. There's clearly deep-rooted problems there, and it needs a root and branch review and reform process.
OK, Jonathan Ashworth, thank you very much for coming into the studio this morning. Always great to have you. Right, it is nearly 10 o'clock. It has zoomed by, and we started this morning asking about education. Matters so much to millions of families around the country. And the Chief Inspector of Ofsted, Amanda Spielman, was in the studio defending her team's inspection of Caversham Primary School. That's the school where the head teacher, Ruth Perry, took her own life in the days after the inspection was carried out.
I think the findings were secure, and I think the inspection team worked with the professionalism and sensitivity that I would expect from our inspectors.
Have you any concerns at all about what happened during that inspection when her school went from outstanding to inadequate?
From what I've seen, I don't have any reason to doubt the inspection.
Well, it would be very interesting in the coming hours to see what people's reaction to that is. But Mary, I'd just like to close with you, though, on the issue of strikes, because it matters so much to families around the country. Last week, Pat Cullen told us there could be nurses' strikes all the way up till Christmas. Is that a possibility if, you don't get the call from Gillian Keegan to go and talk?
If we don't get negotiations, we have no option other to do that. But I want to emphasise again, we don't want to. We want to negotiate and we want to end this dispute. So we'll go in any time. I hope Gillian Keegan calls us today. OK, we'll see. We'll maybe check in with her after the programme. Henry, what did you make of Jonathan Ashworth there?
So two things. First of all, it is worrying to see Labour getting tangled up in a culture war over this. They think the Red Wall doesn't want this stuff. People are desperate for government to intervene. And now, in the middle of a food crisis, two things need to happen. Government needs to increase free school meal eligibility, which is the lowest in England across the UK. They need to increase Healthy Start vouchers, and supermarkets need to start adding bog-offs for veg rather than for unhealthy junk food.
That's an interesting idea, and you've written a lot about that in your new book, Ravenous, which I think is either available now or available shortly.
Available now. It sets out everything that needs to happen, but now that's what needs to happen.
Now, I want to cheer everybody up after some difficult conversations this morning by showing you some amazing pictures of what happened late last night in Wrexham, the small town team that's been bought by two Hollywood superstars. There they are. warming hearts across Wales, and I think maybe making other people happy too. Incredible scenes there. They beat Boreham Wood, who actually are the small football team in Oliver Dowden's constituency, as it happened. Lorna, did you watch it? Were you cheering along?
No, I'm afraid not. But obviously, I'm aware of the story. It was fantastic. Yeah, it's utterly great. Well done.
Mary, have you been following this story? It's an incredible kind of Hollywood...
I did ask my husband late last night, did Wrexham win? And he was amazed because I hate football. So he poured scorn on me for my Johnny-come-lately interest in football.
It's turned you. It's turned you into a football fan. Goodness me.
And Hollywood.
And very, very Hollywood. It probably will be a movie before too long. Henry Dibbleby, Lorna Hughes and Mary Bowson, thanks so much for being with us this morning. We've covered lots of ground, but you've been very, very generous with your insights, and we're grateful for that. And I'm grateful to you, of course, as well, for watching. Well, for the first time, we've spent most of our hour together talking about what's going on in our schools. It's interesting, education, rightly or wrongly, hasn't been up at the top of the charts in political conversation that much in recent years. But as questions about Ofsted persist and the after effects of the pandemic reveal themselves, that's even before we've mentioned how tech is changing kids' lives and bringing new challenges for parents. I wonder if what goes on in the classroom and the staff room might rise up the political conversation again. The emails you've been sending in to us in the last couple of days suggests it will. That, of course, for any politician who reckons they might have convincing lessons, gives them a big, big opportunity. So do keep letting us know what you think. Thank you for your company. And as ever, you can catch up on anything you missed on the iPlayer. And I will look forward to seeing you next Sunday back on BBC One at 9 o'clock. Goodbye for now.